Hello everyone, welcome back to next video, next chapter of Economic Survey 2021. Okay, so before discussing today's chapter, what we will do, let's look into some trivia. I will ask some trivia questions. So let me know who prepares the economic survey. These are very basic things which you should know, and UPSC has asked again and again in their prelims. It has been asked who prepares the economic survey, which department. Then you should tell me that who under whose guidance it is presented. Then you tell me then when it was the first year when economic survey was presented. So I will look for such answer of these trivia in the comment section, or if you can send personally message to me as well. Okay. Hope the previous video was useful and it gave some conceptual clarity. What is happening in this COVID time, how government is managing, why we went for lockdown, whether lockdown was effective or not. So it was a quick recap what we have dealt in the first chapter. Today we will be discussing about the next chapter of Economic Survey 2020 and 21. So the next chapter is talking about, does growth lead to debt sustainability? If yes, actually the answer is yes, but it doesn't lead other way around. Means that low debt doesn't lead to high growth, but yes, high growth leads to low debt or debt sustainability. So in this chapter we will see that what is growth, how it affects the debt, and all these things we will see. And basically this chapter has been presented by the Economic Survey division, the Economic Survey, to provide one intellectual anchoring that how government should move forward during this recession time, what government should go for or do, whether they should go for fiscal consolidation, fiscal spending, what should be the anchor, intellectual anchor for the government, how they should take the decision. So this chapter overall provides the intellectual anchoring to the government. Okay, that is the agenda. Okay, so before starting the chapter in detail, whether the growth lead to debt sustainability and not vice versa, we will discuss these key terms. The key term is fiscal policy, then we will discuss about public debt, we will see debt to GDP ratio, and then we will see primary deficit. Okay, before starting, and we will start with this fiscal policy. So what is fiscal policy? We all have read this in our economy, basic economy, in our books we would have read, we would have solved many questions related to this. So what is fiscal policy? Fiscal policy deals with government spending, it deals with the government's taxation policies. Basically these decisions related to government spending or the decisions related to taxation, they influence the business cycle, they influence the economic conditions of the country economy, right? It is used for balancing the business cycle, it is used for stabilizing it, it is used to regulate the economic output, the growth, employment, balance of payment, and so many things by adjusting the spendings, expenditures, savings and taxes. So the way we manage our expenditure, the way country is managing, we means here country, the way country or the government is managing expenditure, their savings, investment, the fiscal policy deals with that. Okay, mind it, this is different than monetary policy, those who are very fresh in their preparation. So monetary policy is different than fiscal policy. Okay, then next key term is counter-cyclic fiscal policy and pro-cyclic fiscal policy. What is counter-cyclic and what is pro-cyclic? When we, let's say government is spending too much in the economy, government is spending on infrastructure, government is spending on other activities, that is expansionary fiscal policy. That expansionary fiscal policy, one type is expansionary fiscal policy, one is contractionary, when the spendings will be limited, contractionary fiscal policy. When here we talk about cycles, what these cycles mean? These cycles mean the cycle of the economy, the cycle of the business. So when government is spending according to the cycle of the economy, that is pro-cyclic. When government is spending or whatever government fiscal policy, whatever stand is there, if it is in opposite or it is counter to that of the economy cycle or business cycle, then it is known as counter-cyclic. Let's understand this with the help of example. Okay. So what happens here? What is happening here? This blue line represents the business cycle. Okay. And this is your percentage of potential GDP. This is this blue line is representing this curve is representing boom, this curve is representing recession, and the purple line is representing counter cycle, and red line is representing pro-cyclic expenditures. When the condition when the economic condition is when there is boom in the economy or in the economic cycle, business cycle, when there is boom, then the fiscal policy, if they are opposite to that, it is known as counter cyclic. If the fiscal policy is towards or in correlation with the business cycle, then it is pro-cyclic. Okay. So this happens when there is boom, the fiscal policy will be limited, the expenditures will be limited by the government in counter-cyclic fiscal policy. When there is a recession, then government will spend more, then it is counter-cyclic fiscal policy. So it is against the direction of the economy or business cycle. Understand, when there is a recession or slowdown, if government increases the expenditure, government reduces the taxes, so more expenditure and less taxation. So what will happen if government is spending more and collecting less taxes or cutting down on the taxes or reducing the taxes? What will happen? It will generate more demand. Why? Government is spending more. So if government is spending more, it will provide investment, it will provide employment, it will give boost to productivity. So overall the general demand of the economy will improve, right? Then it will drive to the boom, or it will push the economy towards recovery, economic recovery during the recession time. Okay. How many of you have visited the places like Lucknow, Bhopal, or for that matter any ancient or medieval monuments where you have heard this story from your tourist guide that this building was built by that particular king, Nawab or prince, anyone who built this during the drought time or during the famine time? I am familiar with such monument. It is known as Imambada in Lucknow. So Imambada in Lucknow, the story is like goes like this. It was built by the that time Nawab Wazid Ali Shah or somebody built it. They built this because at that time famine conditions were there. People were not having money to eat. They were not having any kind of employment. So at that time the Nawab thought that okay, in order to provide employment, they used to build Imambada in the daytime, and in the night time they used to destruct it. So that way they provided more employment for more number of days to the people. So the employment, it led to more jobs, more payment, and because of that payment there was demand, there was consumption, and ultimately the economy, it moved on the path of the recovery. So this story is there. So even Economic Survey has quoted that ancient and medieval kings, they used to build palaces or buildings during the drought times, during the famine times, in order to boost the employment and demand, right? So this was with respect to the recession and counter-cyclic policy, counter-cyclic fiscal policy during the time of recession. During boom time, what happens? The counter-cyclic fiscal policy, it focuses on contraction rather than expansion. So it will what was happening there in recession time? Reduction of taxes. Here taxes will be increased. There will be cut on the public expenditure. There government was expending more, right? Here government will during boom time, government will do what? During boom time, in counter-cyclic policy, government will cut down the public expenditure in order to control inflation and debt. So this is this graph represents the counter-cyclic fiscal policy and the pro-fiscal policy. Let's understand the pro-fiscal policy or pro-cyclic fiscal policy or pro-cyclic expenditure. It reinforces the business cycle. If the business cycle is boom, it represents also that if the government is spending, means expansionary during the good time and contractionary during the bad time, as it happens in the family. In family we do that. If there is a problem, if I don't have job, or people in the family we don't have job, then we will cut down on our expenditure, right? And when we will have good money, good savings, then what we will do? We will spend more. So pro-cyclic fiscal policy is like that. During good times, it is expansionary. During bad times, it is contractionary. But it is dangerous when we not dangerous with respect to the family level, but when we think and imagine at the level of country, then it's dangerous. It leads to macroeconomic instability, right? And it depresses the investment. It hampers the growth. It hampers the growth. Even at family level, if you think if somebody is poor, and if we borrow money, if the family borrows money and they educate a child, and in future that child reads properly and they crack the civil services exam, or they become good engineer, don't you think this investment is worth taking loan? That loan was worth taking this investment, for this investment that loan was a better decision. Okay, so that way government also takes debt. Government has certain credibility, and the government takes loans from the foreign institutions or the financial institutions, or even we go for market borrowings. It leads to internal and external debt. We will see later. Okay, so this is counter-cyclic, pro-cyclic. Then coming to debt. What is debt? It is total liability of the government. So we are discussing public debt. Okay. So what is public debt? It is total liability of the government that has to be paid either from the Consolidated Fund of India or from where else government will pay. It includes market borrowings. It includes the interest payments which has to be paid back, right? Then what else? Okay. Then it includes internal debt, external debt. In case of India, we have more internal debts, approximately 94-95%. External debt is less. We will see when we will see the structure of the public debt in case of India. Okay. So this is with respect to the public debt. And when we talk about I am not discussing this in detail because you must have seen in your basic economy classes. The internal debt includes the government securities, treasury bills, right? All these things. The short-term loans, it includes these kind of debts or borrowings. So this is about public debt. Debt to GDP ratio. What is debt to GDP ratio? When we talk about debt to GDP ratio, it is a metric. It is a metric to compare countries' debt with that of GDP. It indicates countries' liability to pay back its debt. How much is my country's what is my country's GDP growth, and how much is my GDP? It is represented in percentage. It highlights whether the country is capable of paying back the debt or not in comparison to the GDP. If the growth is good, if my family's or my country's growth is good, then I can pay back the returns. I can pay back the loans which I have taken. If not, then it is a crisis scenario. So debt to GDP ratio highlights or indicates the country's ability to pay back its debts. It is expressed in percentage. In 2019, it was around somewhere around 72%, and based on these percentage, investors will take decision to invest in the economy. Encasing panel on FRBM review committee, they told that this debt to GDP ratio should be reduced and it should be brought somewhere around 60% by 2023, so that we will be in manageable zone. Our debts will be manageable when we compare our growth. So in 2019, it was hovering somewhere around 72%, or definitely it would have increased, and it is expected that by 2023, according to encasing panel, the recommendation is that it should be brought down below the 60%. So that is GDP ratio, debt to GDP ratio. Next keyword we have is primary deficit. So what is primary deficit? It is difference between the current year's fiscal deficit and interest payment of the previous years. That is fiscal deficit minus interest payments. This also you would have read in your basic economy classes. Time to time UPSC has tested this at prelims level. So be thorough with such concepts. When we talk about fiscal deficit, what is fiscal deficit? Total income minus total expenditure, that is fiscal deficit. What is primary deficit? Fiscal deficit of the current fiscal year minus interest payment of the previous borrowings. So that is primary deficit. It has a role to play. It indicates that basically it indicates the borrowing requirements of the government excluding the interest which we have to pay for the previous loans we have taken. So based on these keywords, based on the understanding of these keywords, what we will do, we will see the chapter in detail. Okay. So here, let us start with the chapter. Okay, so before jumping into the chapter, let us see why we are discussing this. We are discussing this because during the COVID time, there is a question mark on the fiscal policy, whether the fiscal policy, how it should be, and it is very significant during this time because unemployment rates are increasing, fiscal deficit is increasing. In recently announced budget, union budget of 2021-2022, fiscal deficit has been pegged at 9.8% by our union finance minister. So what it highlights that the scenario is not good. Fiscal deficit is increasing. Due to COVID, unemployment is increasing. And because of these conditions, there is a pressure on government debt, there is pressure on fiscal expenditure, there is pressure of this credit rating agencies for reducing the sovereign ratings. So amidst this, we have to, because of these vulnerability on external front and internal front, we have to see what kind of fiscal policy we should go for. And then in the backdrop of these points, we need to analyze whether our debts are sustainable or not. That's why this chapter is there. And this chapter establishes this fact, as I told in the starting, it establishes this fact of intellectual anchoring that high growth leads to manageable debts. But low debt doesn't mean that there will be high growth, not vice versa. So that is the theme of this chapter. Okay. So how far we should consider that debts are sustainable or not, or how far the debt should be considered sustainable. So if we have a stable debt to GDP ratio, we have discussed earlier, what is GDP ratio? GDP ratio is how far country is capable enough to pay back its debt or liabilities. So if the GDP ratio is not fluctuating or if it is stable, discussed in 2019, it was hovering around 72%. If it is stable, then we can manage our debts. There should be no too much fluctuations. That this year we have more, so our debt to GDP ratio will increase. Next year, our loans are maturing. If there is maturity of too many loans from previous years, then our debt to GDP ratio will increase. That's why NK Singh panel on FRBM review committee suggested that it should be brought below 60% by 2023, then it will be stable and it will be within the manageable limits. So that was the importance of discussing the debt to GDP ratio. Primary deficit should be below the threshold. Somewhere it was around 1%, few years back it was 1. We'll see in the second volume, volume 2, all these data we'll see, I will give you in the RD sheet as well. So the primary deficit should be below the threshold level. If we have kept a target of 3%, it should, under FRBM Act, we have kept the fiscal deficit target itself of 3.5%, 3%. Time to time we revise, we bring amendments. So it should be within the manageable limit. The primary deficit should be within the manageable limits. Fiscal deficit minus the interest payments, right? So primary deficit has to be below the threshold level. Then our debts will be manageable. Third, there should be negative interest rate growth rate differential. Henceforth, we will call it IRGD. So if IRGD is in negative, then till then it is the debts would be sustainable. What this IRGD means? Interest growth rate differential. So let's imagine Let's understand it with the help of example. Let's say in the year 1 government is borrowing and investing 100 rupees, and in the year 2 government investment yields somewhere around 112 rupees, but government had to pay that 100 rupees and its investment, its interest, so that comes somewhere around 108 rupees. So government has invested and government has earned rupees 112 they have earned, but including the principal amount and interest amount, government has to repay 108 rupees. So what happens, government has added only 4 rupees to the economy. That 4 rupees is country's growth. Again government will borrow 100 rupees, and in the third year they will invest, they will follow the same step and they will invest. Now government will have their own money, 100 rupees they have borrowed and 4 rupees their own. That way this borrowing and the growth, borrowing leads to growth, and this growth will lead to multiplier effect. Okay. So when this interest, if you analyze here, this interest was, we had to pay was somewhere 1.088, at this interest we had to pay. How much amount we have added? 4 rupees. Okay. So if interest rate is less than the growth rate, till that time it is manageable. So interest and growth rate differential, it should be negative, means growth should be always more than interest rate. Then only it will be manageable, then only it will be, our debts will be sustainable. If the day our interest rates will be more than our growth rate, then we are gone, right? So that way we have to analyze. So where were we? Yeah, negative interest rate and growth rate differential. The IRGD has to be within limited limit. So a negative IRGD thus creates an enabling environment for debt sustainable. So here is a fact for us, which can be asked in prelims as well. As a norm in India, it has been analyzed that over the last 2.5 decades, let's see it with the help of graph. Yeah. So if we analyze the debt and growth, this orange line, it indicates the nominal growth rate, and this dotted blue line, it indicates the nominal interest rate. So can you see the difference? Always the growth rate has been higher than the interest rate. And observe one more thing, the fluctuation in the growth rate is, GDP growth rate is more in comparison to the fluctuations in the interest rate. So what is happening? If you observe from 2002 onwards and before that 95 onwards, 96 onwards, growth rate has been higher, except in 2-3 years case. In the case of 2-3 years, it has somewhere gone below the interest rate. That time we were our debts would have been not sustainable. But in general, survey is saying that, economic survey is saying that over the last 2.5 decades, GDP growth rate have been greater than the interest rate. So this analysis, this fact we should remember. This statement can come in prelims. They can ask India's GDP versus interest growth rate, GDP rate growth rate versus interest growth rate. If the statement has been asked to analyze or observe that over the last 2.5 decades, the growth rate, GDP growth rates have been greater than the interest rate, true or false, then it is true. Okay. So, and we have also seen that there had been higher variability of the growth rate relative to the interest rate, okay, over the past 2.5 decades. This implies that whatever debt sustainability we are talking about, or whatever this changes in IRGD, this interest rate and growth differential we are talking about, it is varying, or it's variable mainly because of the growth rate. So we have to focus on growth. So what overall understanding we are getting from this point or this topic is that we have to focus on our growth. Interest rate is mostly, or in most of the years it has been stable only, because whatever loans we borrow from the financial institutions, they are long term borrowings. The interest rate will be very minimal, or it will be very less. It will be not very high in comparison to the money lenders, or it will be not very high. It will be somewhere 1%, 2%, 3% like this. Unlike the money lenders where the poor people go and borrow at the rate of 30 to 35%. Okay. So They are long-term borrowings. They are long-term borrowings. The interest rate will be low, and in over the years, 2.5 decades, 25 years, we have seen the graph that they are in manageable range. They are stable. Our growth rate is fluctuating. So what we have to manage? The government through fiscal policy or through whatever decisions they are taking at the macroeconomic level, they have to target the growth rate. Rest will be taken care. The Irgd will be in negative range, and till that time Irgd is in negative range, our debt is would be sustainable. And survey has also told that this Irgd will be in manageable range till next 5 years. Okay, so this is yeah, here we are. Okay, when we discussed about the counter-cyclic and pro-cyclic fiscal policy, there was a graph which I should have also shown you at that time. The red line in both the cases is representing the private sector investment or private sector net balance with respect to GDP, and the blue line is representing government's net balance as percentage of GDP. So over a years, when you will see, they are opposite. When private is high, government is low. When private is high, government is low. Or when private is low, government is high. This is the case of US and UK. That is, when government public expenditure or public sector's contribution to GDP with respect to expenditure or net balance is less or negative, that time private players, they had invested more, or they have contributed more as a percentage of GDP. So the correlation between the public and private in case of US and UK is high. It is somewhere minus 0.9. But in case of India, what is happening? This correlation is not as good as US and UK. The correlation is hardly minus 0.29. Now observe this graph for private sector net balance as percentage of GDP for private sector red color and blue color for government. This is the case of India. Can you see, when private is increasing, public sector net balance is increasing. Hardly in 1 or 2 cases it has been opposite, but mostly when it is increasing, private sector balance is increasing, then government net balance is increasing. So what we had concluded that fiscal policy till now in general never have been counter-cyclic in case of India. However, other countries have this counter-cyclic fiscal policy practice in it is there in practice, but in case of India, in general, till now, the counter-cyclic fiscal policy was not in picture, and we have not followed that. So that's why survey is presenting this as an argument or a case that government should go for counter-cyclic fiscal policy, which means during the time of recession, government should follow expansionary fiscal policy. That's the argument. Okay. Yeah, relation between debt and GDP we have seen. Okay, here we'll see the comparison of Irgd. What is Irgd? Let me repeat again. Irgd is our interest rate growth differential. So when we compare it with respect to India with respect to other countries in last 25 years, so what does it show? This red line. This red line, when you will observe, this is gray, it is not coming in on the slide, this color is gray. This area of red line and this oval, this circle, it's not, this ecliptic line, this eclipse shows that 2003, around from 2003 onwards till now, the Irgd of India has been in negative range when we compare with the other countries. So what it is saying that when with respect to the cross country comparison, the real interest rate and the when we analyze the real growth rate for a and the Irgd for the period of last 25 years, then for India with respect to the other higher economies, when we compare with other higher economies, India has one of the lowest Irgd, negative average Irgd. So this is the conclusion. Since 2003, India's Irgd has been in negative range. Especially, it is lowest among for the major OECD economies. Okay. So this is the conclusion we have drawn. At the level of Irgd, what we are doing? We are lowest in comparison to the OECD countries from last 25 years. From last 25 years, our growth rate has been more than the interest rate. From the last 25 years, our interest rates have been stable, but the growth rates have been fluctuating. But even though they were higher than the interest rate, these are the conclusions we have derived. And till the time our Irgd is interest rate growth differential is in negative territory, that is in negative territory we have observed here in comparison with the other countries, till that time our debts will be sustainable. So that's the takeaway point. Okay. Okay. There is one more comparison. In India, it is said that we have seen that till the time our debt to GDP ratio is less or manageable, till that time our debts will be sustainable. Primary deficit, if it is below the threshold, our debts will be sustainable. Our Irgd, if it is in negative territory, our debts will be sustainable. So we have seen through graph as well. Now if we compare growth rate and GDP, so this blue line indicates the growth rate and the orange line it indicates the change in the ratio of the debt to GDP ratio. So here if we see these trend, so growth rate has been more than the changes in the debt to GDP ratio. Once it was more and now it is touching, almost the line is touching. So what argument it is telling that higher GDP growth rate or higher GDP growth rate leads to low debts. So our debt to GDP ratio has to be less than the growth rates. Okay. Okay. So let's see. Now the argument is saying, does growth leads to debt sustainability? Yes. So yes, but not vice versa. We'll see how. Whenever government is having high debt, high public debt is there, then what will happen? Government is having debt, I am having debt. If I have to collect my revenue, that is taxes, I have to increase my taxes. So I will go for more taxes. I will increase the taxes, I will look for more slabs, I will look for where all I can look for such avenues where me as a government, I can put more taxes, so more taxes will be there. If there is more taxes, let's say if I am imposing tax on you, then if there are more taxes, what will happen? More taxes will lead to less savings, and less savings will lead to I don't have money, you don't have money, I have imposed taxes on you, so you are paying more taxes to me. So whatever money do you have, you don't have enough savings, your savings will reduce. So you don't have enough money to consume for consumption or for expenditure. So the consumption will reduce, and due to this less consumption, there will be less demand in the economy. When there will be less demand in the economy, there will be pressure on the interest rates, right? Because now growth is not happening. If growth is not happening and we have to pay back the interest rates of our loans, then it will be pressure on that as well. And because of that pressure, we will look for more money. When government does that when they have pressure of interest rate and there is no demand in the economy, they go and ask for more borrowings. So that borrowing, which should have been available for the private players, that comes with the comes to the government, and that leads to the crowding out effect. And because of that crowding out of investment, it further reduces the growth rate. And because of this further reduction of the growth rate, what happens? It will again lead to more high public debt. So it is a kind of vicious cycle, and this vicious cycle is there because of high debt. So high debt will lead to low growth. This is one statement. High growth will lead to low debt, not vice versa. So that's what survey is trying to project and discuss, what through concepts we have discussed, that the growth leads to debt sustainability and not vice versa. Okay? So argument is supporting that higher debt leads to lower growth and not vice versa. Higher GDP growth leads to lower public debt. Okay? So direction of this causality is happening how the other way. Here it is happening if we have low debt, high debt, then lower growth only. But if we have low debt, it doesn't mean high growth. So this has been seen in the case of emerging economies like India. Now this crowding out effect which we discussed here, is it really valid for India's case? Survey is making a point that when we talk about crowding out effect, it is valid in the advanced economies, because in advanced economies the role of public is not much, or the public government doesn't play or doesn't interfere in the market much. So there is a strict division of public versus private. Okay, so because of that, whatever these problems happen and government goes for taking out the money from the market, it doesn't lead to crowding. It leads to crowding out effect in the advanced economies, because there is clear cut demarcation. A market is there and government is taking money from the market, and public has to also take money from the market. But in case of advanced economies like India, if government and government versus this private players or the private market is not, there is no clear segregation. It is somewhat integrated. Government is also playing certain role, or it is acting as an enabler for the private player. So till that time when the government is playing that or performing or doing this enabling role, till that time, whenever government will spend something or will borrow something from the market, and further they will invest in the on the economy, in infrastructure or other projects, it will support the private players rather than crowding out effect. So survey is trying to make argument that in case of India, it leads to crowd in rather than crowd out. Crowding in is valid with respect to Indian scenario. With respect to the advanced economies, it leads to crowding out. Okay. So this is the point which has been made by the economic survey. And why this crowd out effect happens? Because it is generally assumed that saving is fixed. When saving is fixed in the economy, let's say there are 100 people in the economy and government is there and private players are there, private entities are there. So government has to also borrow from these 100 people, private player also has to, or the private entities have to also borrow from these 100 people, and the saving is fixed. So because of this fixed saving, it might lead to crowd out effect. But in emerging economies cases, public expenditure, it boosts the private investment. In the emerging economies, the government does this expenditure on infrastructure, electricity, security, and ultimately it leads to multiplier effect. And because of this multiplier effect on the aggregate demand, the private sector role or the private sector investment will get a boost, and that boost will lead to growth in the economy. That's why economic survey is saying for hand holding, or the expansionary fiscal policy, or counter cyclic fiscal policy during the time of recession. That is the argument. Okay. So how this crowd in happens? When there will be public expenditure by the government, it increases the aggregate demand. Why? It will provide employment to the people. There will be some money will go, government will, let's say government is borrowing or doing some expenditure. What will happen? Government will national infrastructure pipeline, or government will invest in some infrastructure project. People will get employment, and that money will go to the people. Remember, Kings, Lucknow. So because of that, there will be increase in aggregate demand, and that aggregate demand, if there is demand, then private players will utilize their productivity, their capacity. So because of that capacity utilization, in order to fulfill the demand of the people, they will go for investment. It will induce the private investment, it will push, and because of that private investment, there will be productive use of unused resources which was there because of the recession, or till that time the people who have not got employment. Such resources, the human capital or the materialistic resources, they will be used, and it will lead to increase in the growth rate. And when there will be increase in growth rate, then further public expenditure, it will give boost to public expenditure. Okay. Next comes, when we were talking about saving, when saving is limited, then what should be done? So survey is presenting a case that in countries like Asia, demographics plays very important role. And in demography, when we talk about demography, countries like India, they have more number of people in the working age group. to tell you in 2018 and 19 economic survey, there is a chapter dedicated on the future projections of the demography. What is demography at present, what it will be in future, and what role it might play or it can play in the economy. So go and watch that video. I have taken that, it's there already on YouTube. I think it's chapter number 7. It is related to volume 1 itself. It is related to demography and its projection and how it will affect the economy with respect to saving, with respect to demand, with respect to employment and all those things. So when there are more number of people in the working age group, in India it's somewhere around 60 to 64%. So when we have more number of people working, then more money will be there, more savings will be there. So this demography, it plays role in saving. If there is more working population, then it will induce to more savings. When there are more meaningful jobs, jobs should be meaningful in the sense that whatever I am earning, I can save something. It should be not only for my basic needs. When jobs are meaningful, then there will be more savings. And when we have better life expectancy, if let's say if my in average India's life expectancy is somewhere around 64-65 years, if it increases to, in case of Japan, it is somewhere around 80 years. What happens? If there is more better life expectancy, then that particular person, or with the help of better health or better life expectancy, the person will play a role in the economy. They will contribute to the economy through their labor. And whatever money, whatever earnings they have, it will be contributed to, it will contribute to the demand, to the savings. So better life expectancy, meaningful jobs, and working, more number of working force, working age population contributes to saving. And if we have saving, what will happen? Saving will be not fixed. Saving, if we have more saving, then we can get more investment. And if we have more money, then there will be no crowding out effect. Government will also have sufficient money to borrow, and private players will also have sufficient money to borrow for their investment. So that was the agenda of discussion till here. So in general, what happens? If government spends, then more job will be created and demand will be there, and it will boost to the saving. Okay. Now we will see the structure of public debt. India's debt, if we see the composition, India's debt, 70% of India's debt, that is blue color, is central government's share, center's share. The orange, that is 30%, it is the share of the state government. So this is the composition of public debt. 70% of the public debt is there with the center, and 30% is belongs to states. Next composition, 6% is our external liability and 94% is our internal liability. Okay, am I audible? Okay, sorry for the interruption. Okay, so we have seen the composition of central government debt first, further. Earlier we said, we saw that total liability, total composition of public debt 70%, 30%, 70% to the center, 30% to the belongs to state. Out of that central government's debt, 6% is our external liability, 94% is our internal liability. We have seen from where all government borrows, and go and revise your basic economy, that what are treasury bills, UPSC has asked, the number also 90 days, 150 days, all these things. Okay, so this was in general composition. Now let's analyze the India's debt. Survey is saying that India's public debt it is lowest among G20 countries. Our debt is one of the lowest among G20 countries. So this is one point of analysis. So why we are discussing that, all these things? It can come as one of the option in the prelims, or it can come as analytical question, analysis question in mains. Then we should know on what lines we have to argue. So survey is making a point that India's overall debt as a percentage of GDP is lowest among the group of G20 OECD countries and also among the group of BRICS countries. So with respect to OECD and BRICS, it is lowest among all, one of the lowest. Okay, so it is lowest, not even one of the lowest, it is lowest. So let's take this argument from survey. Next argument is that public debt since 2003 has been declining and stable since 2011. So our public debt and overall debt for India has declined since 2003. So this is one analysis and argument for us, and it has been stable since 2011. Also, when we talk about the sharing, we saw that 70% share belongs to central government and state government, the share is 30%. So survey is saying that is desirable and that is justified because central government has to manage overall the macroeconomic conditions, so it is desirable. They have to manage they have to take care of the macroeconomic stability, so it is desirable, and they have the credibility. Basically, the central government is the representative, so they have the credibility to borrow from the external market. So it is desirable. That ratio is desirable. Okay, so that is another observation by economic survey. Next observation is that the loan which we have borrowed, the debts which are there, they mostly are of long term. Because of their long term maturity, it insulates us, or it insulates the fluctuation which would have been there because of the interest growth rates in the because of the short term loans. So long term maturity, because of the long term maturity, it will be insulated. The profile of the public debt, India's public debt is insulated, and the debt profile is insulated over the interest rate volatility. So this is the analysis what survey is presenting. The survey is saying that India's debt are, by analyzing all these things, it is saying that India's debt is manageable, and it is sustainable and it will be manageable because IGRD, that is IRGD, interest rate growth differential, it will be in manageable zone until next 5 years. Means it will be in negative territory, and till the time it is in negative territory, we have already concluded that it will help in debt sustainability. Okay, so what is the way forward? So the way forward which has been suggested by the survey is that we should go for counter-cyclic fiscal policy, and here they have given the evidences of Chile, that is Chilean fiscal rule. There is a country, Chile, in South America. They have given this evidence from there. Chile has experienced economic boom due to copper exports from the period of 2003 to 2008. So they, at that time, what they did, counter-cyclic fiscal policy. When there was a boom in the economy, they went for saving 1%, this is called a structural surplus rule. They adopted this structural surplus rule as the part of counter-cyclic fiscal policy. What they did there? They saved 1% of the GDP. Structural surplus rule up to the target was the government has to save a surplus of 1% of GDP every year. So till the time there was boom, they saved it. In 2008, when there was economic recession, global slowdown, then they went for counter-cyclic fiscal policy. They went for expansionary fiscal policy. So what they did, they invested at that time, expansionary fiscal policy. So till the time there was boom because of copper exports, they went for contractionary fiscal policy. 1% of GDP was kept as a surplus with the government. So in these 5 years, they managed their debts. They reduced their debt to up to 0%, and when government was or the country was facing recession, then they went for expansionary fiscal policy. because of taking the help of this evidence, that is learning from Chilean fiscal rule of structural surplus rule of keeping a surplus of 1% of GDP every year. The survey is making a point that India should also adopt this counter fiscal policy during the counter cyclic fiscal policy during recession time. That is the time which is going now, which we are facing now. So what is the benefit of expansionary fiscal policy? We have already discussed that it helps in boosting the potential growth. We have seen how here that how public expenditure will increase the aggregate demand. It will lead to, it will induce the private investment. It will further make use of the productive. It will create the productive use of the resources, and thus it will increase in the growth rate. So that's what survey is saying, that the benefit of the expansionary fiscal policy is there, that it will create, it will boost the potential growth, and it will create the high paying jobs. Government, for example, is investing in national infrastructure pipeline projects. So there, what kind of jobs are required? Jobs by engineer, analyst, jobs of related to civil engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. So government is, economic survey is arguing that this kind of expansionary fiscal policy, it creates high paying jobs, not low paying jobs. That's why we discussed here meaningful jobs. When jobs will be meaningful, we already have high working age population, and life expectancy also we are improving. That's why there is a chapter on health itself in the economic survey, that is chapter number 5. We will discuss that how health has taken a center stage. So with better health, more working age population, and good meaningful jobs, what will happen? The expansionary policy will create high paying jobs, and thus it will be helpful. So this is it with respect to this chapter, and that's it. We have discussed about debts, we have discussed about certain key terms, and whether our debts are manageable or not, and so many things. So let's have a quick revision of whatever we have discussed today. Okay, so quickly revise, we have discussed keywords, that is debt to GDP ratio, we have discussed primary deficit, we have discussed the fiscal policies. Under that we have discussed the counter cyclic fiscal policy, the cyclic fiscal policy, and that's it. Okay, then we discussed making it a base. We discussed debt sustainability, whether India's key features responsible for India's debt sustainability, primary deficit, debt to GDP ratio, Irgd, interest rate growth differential, we have discussed that. And what is India's scenario with respect to public debt? We have seen the composition, we have seen the India's scenario, whether it is in manageable zone or not, with respect to, in comparison with other countries, the Irgd, the interest rate growth differential we have seen in last 25 years. We have seen the growth rate of the last 25 years. We have seen the growth rate and debt to GDP ratio comparison of last 25 years, right? So we have seen India's scenario. Based on that, we have seen India's debt. What is the structure of India's debt? 70:30, 6:94%, 6% versus 9%, remember? Then we have analyzed. We have analyzed 4 things. Remember 4 things? Lowest among G20 OECD countries and BRICS. It is within manageable limit. Next 5 years, the Irgd will be in manageable limits of negative territory. So we have discussed that, right? If not, just see this. Distribution is desirable, long-term maturity, we have discussed this, we have seen this analysis. And overall we have discussed debt sustainability, India's case, whether we are it's in manageable zone or not, and by making this argument, we have discussed what should be the role of counter cyclic fiscal policy. It should be, the role should be of creating more jobs, more growth, and crowd in, not crowd out. So we have seen this. So I hope the chapter is clear and you have consolidated the learnings. Quickly we'll go through certain triggers. I will give the prelims question in the last, so that you have considerable amount of questions and you can revise well through questions. Mains question I am giving after every chapter. So here we have mains question. The first question is, India's debt is within sustainable limits, comment. So now we have structure, we have data, we have analysis. We know whether it is in sustainable limits or not. We know now key words. We know the key points. We know the technical points why or whether they are in manageable limit or not. So now no more we will write layman answer, we will write technical answers using the concepts of the economy. So it will sound more logical. Next question is, analyze the role played by expansionary fiscal policies during the time of recession. So here we can draw that vicious cycle, we can give our arguments with respect to the demography, we can give our analysis with respect to the job, crowd in. So now you have sufficient points to write this answer, these answers. Okay, so that's it. Try to attempt these 2 questions, revise well, and hope these videos are helping you all. And if it's helping, then do these homeworks, do write the answers. Otherwise, it's very volatile. Don't think that it's from now on only we have to focus on the prelims preparation, and why to give so much time to economic survey. Now you know the importance, what benefits you are getting, what keywords you are getting, and how it is helping you in writing better answers. So you have your own answers, rest you know. It's very important document, so take it seriously. We'll meet in the next video with next chapter. Take care, bye-bye. Thank you.